Part of what we talked about in the last hour was the impact of the hip-hop culture and the industry on our children and the impact that it has, the words of a Rick Ross, the words of a Lil Wayne. And I would suggest that the greatest safeguard against any sort of cultural influence, whether it is the movies, whether it is television, whether it is magazines, whether it might be video games, the single greatest safeguard against our children being influenced to do negative things is the parents. And so it's very important to me that we do a show on and about parenting. And we have the very good fortune of having in the Washington, D.C. area now, a young man who's taken over the nation's capital by storm and captured the imagination of the world. It is quite arguable that the most compelling, interesting, exciting, scintillating sports story of 2012 was the story of Robert Griffin III. It was nothing short of amazing and fantastic, the kind of magic that this young man practices on a football field and off the football field. Someone who is seen and observed as just one of our great citizens in the country. Well, how did he become that way? He became that way, and who was he most influenced by? And if you read anything about him, he is not hesitant at all about paying tribute to the incredible influence of his parents. His parents are here with us today in studio. I want to welcome Jackie and Robert Griffin to the Rock Newman Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Also with us is Dr. Sanjeev Sriram. Mm-hmm. Dr. Sriram is a Harvard Fellow, former chief resident at UCLA, at pediatrics at UCLA, and is currently working here in the Washington, D.C. area with children, with their parents, trying to make an impact, trying to keep it all together in this particular area. Let me, though, start by saying to Jackie and Robert Griffin, just to ask the question, how does it feel that this little kid that you put diapers on is now recognized as one of the most formidable athletes and personalities in the world? Can you just, how does that feel?
Wow, that's huge. I would say we feel, blessed that, God gave us an opportunity to raise Robert, and our daughters, and He gave us the wisdom to basically deny ourselves once our children became, of this world. So, it's a lot to take into, and we're still trying to, find a happy medium there. Mostly focusing on Robert, but just making sure that he stay focused and respect the opportunity that God has given him. So we're very blessed that people do see Robert in a positive light.
I want to take a moment to share that Robert and I had dinner on last Friday, and we found a lot of similarities. And in that conversation, there was what came out of that conversation was so much history that maybe many of you don't know. Mr. Griffin grew up in the 9th Ward in New Orleans.
Yes, sir.
He grew up in the 9th Ward, and he grew up with a determination to move beyond the 9th Ward. He grew up with a determination to make something out of his life. And it was a real testament of people having an individual will. Tell us, if you would, what prompted and spurred you to make a better life for yourself when so many around you, family and friends, met a demise?
Well, I'll tell you, start with my mom. She gave us a vision, and my dad made sure that we followed what my mom told us. And as I began to mature, and I mean really early on, from kindergarten to about 3rd grade, I'm reading all these books. We're getting all these books in, and they talk about the world, areas that I didn't see in New Orleans. So about 8 years old, I realized that I was not going to live in New Orleans, and the environment, it was very volatile. The people with maladaptive behaviors that really was a demise to our community. And as I saw that, I had fear out there at 8 years old, going to school and seeing people get shot, seeing the drugs and stuff at every corner. So I knew for me, that wasn't what I wanted to aspire to. And I began to set myself on a course to leave New Orleans. And all of New Orleans wasn't like that, but the area where I grew up in was like that. So that was important for me.
Let me ask Ms. Griffin, where did you grow up, and what were the circumstances of your youth?
I grew up around the City Park area of New Orleans, downtown New Orleans, well, maybe the center of New Orleans. Graduated from St. Mary's Academy, and our backgrounds are a little bit different. I grew up in a nicer neighborhood, but my determination, as my husband's, was the same. I stayed in New Orleans after graduating, attended college, and worked. And as a result of it, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I thought I would work and go to college because it was my dream to get a college degree. Over a course of, I say, 2 years of just constantly hitting my head up against the wall, I decided that I needed to do something more in order to get my degree, so I decided to go into the military. I went into the military with a determination to get a college degree and make a difference so that the next generation, because my husband and I both feel the next generation should do better than the last. So that was my determination, to go in there and make a name for myself and get a college degree. That was it.
And then you all met. We're going to talk about that because I want to hear both of you all's story about that. I heard a little bit about his, but I want to hear both of these stories. Doctor, we'll be back with you just after the breaks here. We're going to take a short break. There seem to be a few technical difficulties that we need to get ironed out, so we'll pay the bills a little bit early while we get those difficulties ironed out, and be back in just a moment on The Rock Newman Show. Welcome back to The Rock Newman Show again today, Saturday, March the 30th, 2013. I want to reset here with my guest, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, from the he's a Harvard fellow, and he's a former chief resident of pediatrics at UCLA, and the parents of Robert Griffin III, the most electrifying, exciting individual athlete of 2012. They're not just the parents of Robert Griffin. Robert has 2 sisters. I want to come back and talk to you guys about all of that in just a moment. But Dr. Sriram, Robert Griffin just talked about growing up in an environment in the 9th Ward in New Orleans. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that's the show enough hood, if you will. And some very tough circumstances, and the statistics are incredible there about people not making it out. Mm-hmm. He recognized and realized at the age of 8 years old, he had something in him that said, I'm going beyond this. I'm not going to be a circumstance of my surroundings.
Right.
You deal with children all the time.
Yep.
what gives one child, that kind of initiative to go beyond and absolutely not become a victim of their circumstances while so many succumb?
Yeah, I think it's a very tough question, and I take care of children here in Ward 8, in Washington D.C. A lot of kids who live here in Anacostia, and their circumstances are very similar. They're exposed to a lot of the same things that you were talking about, sir, and and I'm faced with these kinds of questions from parents, from the children themselves as they start to kind of grow up and become more aware of their surroundings, and to tell you the truth, I think what's interesting about the last hour of the program and what we're talking about now is how they're connected.
Yes.
And what I learned from the last hour is the importance of actually what we could have learned from Spider-Man comics, that with great power comes great responsibility. And that I think that one of the first things that that we owe it to ourselves who are taking care of children, whether it's as a pediatrician or as a parent, is that never underestimate your own power. Never underestimate your own power, because as an individual, because
and as a parent,
because one of the most important things that a child sees is a parent exercising parental power and parental strength, and in the form of responsibility. When you see that is probably one of the most important influences, and that influence can protect you from a lot of negativity. That I think whether that negativity is in is in the form of a Rick Ross lyric, or whether that negativity is in your immediate surroundings and what you're exposed to, knowing that that there are adults in your life who are unafraid of their own power within, that they are unafraid to exercise that power through responsibility. I think that that's an enormous influence on a child, because that's where that child starts to kind of learn that yes, these are my circumstances, but I as an individual have something within me, but just like this mom or dad has something within them, and tapping into it is the challenge of childhood and parenting and life in general. But I think it's when we fail to kind of really tap into that power, when we underestimate it, that's when we start to undersell it. When we undersell it, that's when we start to really we compromise everything. We start to really sell ourselves short on what we can become, what we what is out there for us. And it's when we with great power comes great responsibility. When we're able to actually embrace that and exercise it, that's when we start to really surmount our odds.
Folks, I think I used in the last segment, before we went to a break, the term celebrate, and celebrating parenthood. And the more I looked around and thought about this particular show, I had no idea. These are one of the incredible attributes of one of the many incredible attributes of Mr. and Mrs. Griffin is there are people of deep humility, are people of deep faith and of deep humility, who I know have a certain sense of having discomfort about applauding themselves or talking about themselves. So I didn't know if they'd come on the program. I really wished that they would, because when you talk about celebrating parenthood and an example, and the doctor here really articulates talking about knowing your power and your ability to influence your offspring, knowing your ability to rise above your circumstance. Okay, so we talk about that here. What is an example of that? And an example of that, who I think that we should applaud. We hear so much about the lack of parenting in our communities, and really communities across the board. But here's an opportunity, and I'm just going to keep on using that word because I am just so utterly impressed about their journey, and their journey represents a journey that you all can take. They are an example that we all can draw from, that if they came out of the circumstances that they came out of, that you too can arrive, you too can achieve what they have achieved. Now, he talks about recognizing your power. What was it in your circumstances, Robert, that made you have the sense of self-sufficiency, that you looked out at a world and said, no matter what I'm looking at, how high the hurdles are, how deep the valleys might be, I'm rising above this? Where did that come from?
Well, I'll tell you, introduction to faith very early. I think I probably knew Jesus before I knew the alphabet. I think that my mom and dad, they poured a lot into us. You know, my dad, and I explained that to you. I don't really want to get deep into a few things my dad was able not to do, but he always poured something into us. He always told us things that he wasn't able to get done for himself, because it was a sacrifice for him. And then my mom, them two together, you know, giving us a vision that we had to do better than the circumstances that they was given. And that was very important, you know, that sense of those two parents for me was important, because once I left out that house, I had to deal with a lot. You know, if anyone out there ever grew up in a project, it's not something that you really want to be happy about. It's something like a temporary situation. That's what it's supposed to be. And for me, that's what it was going to be. Versus some of my friends, you know, they just recycled it, and that was really tough. For me, even when I go back and see them, they're still in those circumstances when we as young people talked about moving to the next level. So I attribute it, you know, to faith, because that was a great community that I had there. My parents pouring in information to me, and you know, my mom made us read. I mean, she made us read everything, and that was very powerful. I mean, I still read a lot today, and I really attribute those things, you know, to the empowerment for me, so that I'm like, okay, they can do it, you know, because, you know, I prime example, and this is a great testimony, you know, with the President Obama here. You know, when people used to tell us that we can be anything, they meant that, except president. And that's talking to a 7-year-old kid in 1972. Anything out there wanted to be, astronaut, you name it. But the president, we knew, they didn't say it, but we knew that wasn't one on the card. But that been blown to water, you know, now that we have that guy standing there in the White House. So, you know, there's no limits.
There is such a rich history you guys have, and Lord knows I could jump in anywhere. I'm going to take the liberty to talk about something that you and I talked about over dinner, and that I just thought was so wise. And when we talk about parenting, that this is the kind of thing. Listen, y'all. Listen who are listening on 1480 radio. Pull over on the side if you need to, because hear this clearly. And those of you that are watching around the world, and Lord knows we are very appreciative of the calls that we've gotten from New York, from Detroit, the call we got from Norway. It's probably going to be next week before we get to you, but I promise you we will. But I want you to listen to this. You know, we were talking about boxing, and again, I told you this is a humble man, but he's a boxing encyclopedia. I thought I was the expert in boxing, and clearly he knows more than me. But one of the things we talked about was the career of Mike Tyson. And we talked about the tragedy of Mike Tyson. And the tragedy of Mike Tyson is best highlighted in his conviction for rape in Indiana. And I'd rather you explain what you said to your daughter than me try to explain it. But I want you to understand, when I talk about an example of parenting, here it is.
Well, once Mike Tyson was accused and then convicted of rape, I brought my two daughters in. They were very young, and I explained to them, because you know, this was all over the television, that personal responsibility, we don't know what occurred in that particular room, what were the circumstances, but a young lady should never go to a man's, you know, room, house at, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because it's sending a message. And no means no, absolutely. But that, we don't want to put them in that situation. And we made sure we really honed in on that, because whatever occurred, we don't know. He was convicted, and you see him, he really felt he didn't do anything. But we don't want to put our kids in that type of circumstance. I even went on to tell Rock that, when you have a person, the type of behavior that Mike Tyson was, displaying, and his reputation, especially for us as African Americans, we shouldn't bring people into an environment of a beauty pageant when we're promoting the beautiness of an African American woman. So I kind of think the organizers failed us as African Americans in that respect. And then this thing happens, and it's like, okay, Mike has a reputation, which he basically was convicted on, and this young lady, the amount, whatever happened, is scarred.
So there was, so there was responsibility beyond just Mike Tyson. And you know what? Those things make sense, folks. And the idea of parenting, although it's maybe one of the most difficult jobs in the world, when you give care and concern, and as you said, strength and direction, the best you can do is to give the best that you can give. Then it's a lot of individual choices that have to be made by those that you're giving it to. Now, let me ask you about your daughters. What was it, what sort of message and mission? I'll stay more with message. Having seen the world in the military, what was some of the main messages that you as their mom wanted to impart to them?
Well, one of the main ones was to their foundation in Christ. I thought that was very, very important because it was very important for me. I wanted to let them understand that there was nothing that they couldn't do because of their faith in God. But then also I wanted to be an example. We're parents that believe, not those, the parents that say, do as I say do, but don't do as I do. Mm-hmm. So we felt that if I showed them an example of a woman, the best that I can, not perfect, but an example of a woman, then they will follow. So I was careful about everything that I did. We didn't go to parties. We didn't go out party. We didn't drink. Didn't allow alcohol in our homes. They never saw me come in or go out after 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So I just felt that showing them, not just saying it, but showing them an example of what a woman should do and say and act like was very important. And also the guidance. I wanted to make sure that they could come to me and talk to me about anything, but also know that their dad and I were a team. So anything that they disclosed to me, he would know about. Right. So they knew Could never play. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to play one against each other. So if you can feel free to come to me, but know that as soon as we finish our conversation, I will let your father know what's going on, because we're a team. And over the years, the kids continued to come to me, and they knew that I was going to go to their dad and tell them what was going on. But they felt safer telling me, and then letting me lay the bowl on dad, and then he could come in.
So now I'm gonna tell a secret. So now I'm gonna tell a secret that was supposed to be a secret that ain't a secret no more. And that particular secret was, we had arranged for them to call in today, and it was supposed to be a secret. But one of them told him. And Papa Thu didn't want no surprise. And he didn't want no secrets. It's not a secret that we've got to go to a break, and I can't wait to get back to talk to these wonderful people who are my guests here on The Rock Newman Show.
Hi, Grandpa. I watched the music video. I loved it so much. Thank you for inspiring me for watching it. Bye.
That video that she watched, I sent my granddaughter. Who is 9 years old, and the video that was done, what was that, 1980, in the 80s, We Are the World. And I sent her the song. I sent her the song and the lyrics that were attached to it. And it's talking about we are the world. We are the children. and we need to do better amongst ourselves. So that's the video that she was referring to. She's a big Michael Jackson fan. We Are the World, good doctor. Before we went to break, both Mr. and Mrs. Griffin talked about their obligation and sense of responsibility. Man, would the world be a better place if we had more Mr. and Mrs. Griffin?
But what I really appreciated was the simplicity of it.
Yes.
That I mean, one of the best things that I've ever heard from the pediatricians who trained me in pediatrics was that for children, long before they care what you think, they have to think that you care. And I mean, the most powerful thing for them is to.
Excuse me again. This is live radio, so this is the stuff we have to do on live radio. Okay. Everyone in the audience, please don't say anything. Thank you very much.
Okay. But I mean, long before children care what you think, they have to think that you care. I mean, and I think what Mrs. Griffith was describing was that your actions speak so much louder than your words. And when your words finally come along after hours and hours and days and weeks of just action, where they see you living by the standard that you are speaking of.
The example.
I mean, that is huge. And this is where I feel like even the last hour of talk, where we were talking about the power of the radio and the power of the record companies but there's an amazingly powerful thing when a parent says to a child, this is what is acceptable and this is what is not acceptable in these boundaries called our home, in this land called our family, of which you are a citizen and so am I, but I'm kind of de facto leader right now of this land. And the idea that I mean, the simple power of telling your child no more juice, the simple power of no, we're not going to buy that sugary cereal, the simple power of no, we're not going to buy that lyric, but we will buy this song. Those are just huge influences. And I mean, as small as it may seem, I mean, those are the things that really do shape and impact a child anymore, so much more than Rick Ross ever could.
You were talking about what you let your girls see, and the example that you felt as if you had to be. Lord knows I've heard too many parents say, don't do as I do, you do as I say. And I cringe when I hear that. I want to give, because we were talking about the girls, something that I saw just recently. One of Muhammad Ali's daughters, not Layla, who's the fighter, one of his other daughters, she came to the house one day, relatively grown, and according to Ali, she looked like a hooch mama. She was just dressed in a way that he was uncomfortable with, that he really had issues with. And he sat her down and he spoke to her and he said, and women who are out there listening, men who are out there listening, listen up. He said, whatever is precious, whatever is really special, always comes with a cover. The pearl, you gotta really work to get to the pearl. And if you know your value and you understand how precious you are, you don't go around parading yourself. Now, if there are any women libbers out there, which I consider myself a woman's libber in here, but there's something to that. There's something to that example of preserving yourself, of appearing in a way that is honorable. There was a Dave Chappelle that said, because I put on a police uniform, and you're gonna think I'm a police. And if you dress like a hooch mama, I'm gonna think you're a hooch mama. There's something to all of that. The example that you talked about, and I really like your word, the simplicity of it. Mm-hmm. Now you know why I wanted to have him on, for many more reasons than one. But this example is, again, something we wanted to celebrate. We have a question from the audience. Yes, sir.
How you doing? I'm Justin Ricks. Basically, just moved to D.C. about 3 weeks ago to take a job with the Washington Nationals. Prior company here, I was working with the Memphis Grizzlies. And when I was working with the Grizzlies, I used to talk to Coach Hollins a lot about perseverance. And, he had a lot of good answers. But I wanted to ask you, because basically we come from the same area, the same situation. And, a lot of people, a lot of young males.
New Orleans?
Well, I'm from Monroe, Louisiana, which is about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so... Yeah, so basically, I just wanted to ask you, basically coming from where we come from, a lot of young men don't make it. When you was faced with your obstacles early on in your life, like, what did you do to help you persevere?
Well, for me, again, it was family, and then we traveled a lot, with my mom and dad, to our families, that wasn't in New Orleans. And I had an uncle who recently passed about a week and a half ago. They kind of shaped me to who I wanted to be, because I had no family per se in the area, in the environment of the projects, but I saw this cycle. And when I say cycle, I mean fear was in there, because I was seeing people getting shot, and I was very young witnessing it, and that was, very traumatic for me. But for me, it was like, I had the right people. Every Sunday I was trying to be the first person at the church, because those people, and it was at the time, I was a Catholic at the time. They really embraced us. They was like the helpers of our community, if you wanted that help.
Takes a village to raise a child.
Absolutely. So, and then, not just that, but my mom association, like my wife was saying, she only associated with people who was trying to better themselves. That was very powerful for us. And going through each thing and watching and hearing all the stories of people that's dying and getting shot, not doing well, and just basically not having a vision. And I think that's the one thing that for you personally, have a vision for yourself. Project yourself where you want to be the next 5 years, the next 10 years. Position yourself where, hey, I'm going to retire. And what I'm going to do when I retire. I think that really helped me. So as I started plotting my course, to get through, running from the bus stop, like, a half a mile to my house, because I didn't want to get caught by these guys that was pulling people into their associations, and I was getting home really late from basketball practice. So all those things just motivated me, and I just kept and I pressed forward, and when I had the opportunity to get completely out that environment, I joined the military.
You ran track before you ran track.
Oh, yes. I mean, thank you.
In studio is Dr. Sanjeev Sriram and Robert and Jackie Griffin, the parents of RG3. I'm not one of those that does a lot of research. I like to try to conduct these interviews as organically as I can. Just being an inquisitive, sort of curious person, with an effort to try to ask the question that I think a listener might want to ask. Just kind of keep it real. And I do whatever research I do, I just do it myself. I don't have other people going and looking at stuff. But in looking at a little bit, I read an article about your leaving to go to the Iraq War, and how that was a moment that you tried to instill in Robert his responsibility as the man of the house. How old was he then?
Robert, let's see, was 2000. Actually, he was 2000. He was actually 12, about to turn 13. Yeah, really close to turning 13, and I'll share. Okay, what happened? I was retiring. I was pretty much done with the military. I was about to enroll in college, and I get this phone call telling me, stop everything you're doing. We're about to go to Kuwait. I'm like, okay. So I called my wife and said, okay, I'm heading back. My retirement's going to be stopped. So we begin to, get everything ready to move out to Kuwait. And I was supposed to leave like a month and a half later, and I got a phone call on February 11th, 2003, that I was I think it was 11 to 12 o'clock at night, that I was leaving to go to Kuwait that next morning.
Oh my God.
Which was it was traumatic in the fact that, when you have already made plans to leave a little bit later, and then Robert's birthday was the 12th. So I left 5 o'clock in the morning on his birthday. But as we was building up to me leaving, I was talking to him and sharing all the pitfalls with my wife, my daughters, and specifically Robert, because Robert, though he's a young person, he locked in on what you said, and he believed in what I told him, believed what his mom told him, because he had tremendous success in academics and in sports and behavior. So when we would tell him something, trust me, he locks it down, he holds on tight to it like a vault. So I was sharing with them all the things they were going to hear, through CNN and all the other different networks. I said, don't believe that. I made a plan with my wife regarding where I was going to be. And I kind of scripted it a little bit using the map of Louisiana. For example, if I was in Kuwait, I told her where I was going to be. That's what my code to my wife when I did communicate with her, so she kind of understood where I was at. And I told them, if they find themselves watching that television, then turn it off. And Robert caught them many times watching that television, and he went in and said, Dad said click, and turned it off. And I was sharing with him, some of the responsibilities, because, when you're going to war, it's serious business. I would share with you, when they say war is hell, I can tell you they're absolutely right. So I was preparing them for that, because, it wasn't just me going to Iraq, and I had to show a strong front because I was a leader, but I was leaving my wife, on the fact that I had made a promise to her once the army was over with, and the kids leave, just me and her again. So, and that was a tough deal because I was going and I'm looking at her and I'm trying to hold it together myself. And, so I just continued to pour into Robert a bunch of things that I had gave him over the years. And I said, you have to do these things. And if you do these things, you're going to continue to have success, and our home is going to be, together. Because not only me going to Iraq or going overseas, to defend the country, but the mere fact I have to come back and reintegrate myself back to my family. And that wasn't easy either.
Okay, so let me ask. I would like for you, Jack, if you don't mind, if you would pick up. So he had to leave in the morning on the day of Robert's birthday. 13. So he was gone. Now you were gone 6 months? 5 months?
No.
5 or 6 months.
5 or 6 months.
He had sort of taught, preached, tried to instill in Robert what to do and what not to do. How did the guy who is, has become everything to people in this region, how did he act as a 13-year-old during those 6 months? Tell us about that.
Well, he held close everything that his father, all his instructions, as he always did. And he made sure that we complied, because he enjoyed the fact that his dad told him that he was the man of the house while he was gone.
Hallelujah.
And so he not only maintained all our expectations, but he exceeded them. He did, he was already an A student. He made sure that he continued that and went beyond that. Academically, athletically, he kept striving, because when we would talk, he would always say, when Dad comes back, I want him to be proud of me. And the conversation in our household was always a positive one, but that's because of our Christian background. No matter what anybody told us, one day I remember in church someone said, well, what are you going to do if your husband doesn't come back? And I said, well, my husband's coming back, so that's really not a plan for us. We're planning what we're going to do when he gets back. And so we stood on that, and Robert was proud of being the little man of the household, and he wore that title really well.
So you go off, and Robert is the man of the house, and exceeds everybody's expectations. And I'm going to try to ask this question without tearing up and being emotional, because when I read about it, it was a very special moment. So you come back, and you guys from a distance see each other, and then what happened?
Well, when I got back from Iraq, Robert wasn't in the house. My wife had set him up in a basketball camp. I guess a few hundred miles from where we was at, so we had to drive to go pick him up. When I saw him, I'm like, oh my goodness, the kid had stretched out. I'm looking at him like, wow. I was only gone a few months. I felt, and it was. To me, I was surprised, in the growth. But the one thing that really stuck out to me, that he was well adjusted. That did a lot to me. I was glad to see my wife and my daughters when I got back, overwhelmed. But my son wasn't there, and I wanted to make sure that he was okay, because I was writing them while I was over there, and my wife was giving me great information. But when I saw Robert, I think it did something to me. Inside, it really did something to me when I saw him, and it kind of made sense to everything I did, over there defending our country, because that was my job. It was satisfying.
I read in the magazine that you guys ran towards each other.
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to be together here. He's not. It was, it was something. I was really glad to see him. It was.
You want to describe it?
Yeah.
He's had a little difficulty.
Yeah. Well, he was sitting in the vehicle, and Robert came out because Robert knew that I was coming to get him. And so when Robert came out, he just stood on the little steps. My husband opened the door, and he got out, and my son took off running, and they embraced each other. And Robert said, my husband said, "I'm back," and he said, "Are you done with the military?" And my husband said, "Yes, son, I'm retiring this time." And he said, "Thank God." And they embraced.
Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. And thank God for you guys being here. Good doctor. Give us some wrap-up words here.
Oh, wow. They're the experts. I'm just doing my job as the doctor.
I'll tell you what. I'm gonna take some credit for getting one of the great examples of parents. I'm gonna take some credit for that. And what I love so much is that my listening audience and the viewing audience can see what I saw and why it was. I'm snotting up here. Why it was that it was so important to me to try to have them as the quintessential example. And Lord knows, and I say quintessential example, and quintessential example doesn't mean that anybody's perfect. Never has and never will. But as an example to aspire to, this here is a wonderful example.
Oh, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
So now tell us where you are in the work that you're doing, because this hour has gone by so fast. I haven't been able to get into a lot that I wanted to get into, but if you can give us, we've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. I work for Children's National Medical Center. I'm positioned here in Washington D.C. I'm actually up both of the intersections of the studio. I work up at Good Hope Road, and I'm down at Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, and I love being a pediatrician here. And I think that what's so inspiring about just hearing the story is that, working with children living in such, tough circumstances, you start to kind of question and wonder, how are kids going to make it? I see all of this, just because I take the bus to work, I don't have a car. So, I'm exposed to everything that they're exposed to, but, it really makes you wonder, how do they make it? How does anybody make it? And, hearing this story, this is how. This is the how.
Absolutely.
And I know I started my little segment saying that with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that, it's one of those things where it just speaks volumes to see people with just tapping into that power, it might be small, it might not seem like much, but it's yours. Yeah. It is yours. And I think that that's the beautiful thing about the story, is just that, you're looking at that everyday power doing extraordinary things. And, I think we owe it to each of ourselves not to underestimate it.
Well, I'll tell you something. It is certainly not something that I underestimate. And as someone, I consider myself, I grew up in this area. I consider myself a son of the soil of the DMV, and I recognize and pay tribute to and honor you guys for coming here, for your son playing here and inspiring a region, and for the inspiration that today you have given to my listening audience and to my viewing audience. And on behalf of the entire region, to say thank you for the example that you obviously have always been, and thank you for being a part of our community. We love you guys, and we just welcome you here with so much open arms, and thank God for you all showing up today. Folks, we got to wrap it up right there. This is 3 hours that went by in a blur. We'll see you the next time around, same place, same time. God bless.
Rock Newman Show.